Hello, welcome to the Elevate Database Show, number 23. Hey, everybody. We're here to explore current topics in data visualization, share our creative inspiration, and the tools and techniques that we're experimenting with as practicing information designers. Today is a very special topic. We are talking about all things Duncan. Duncan in the house.
Does that mean I'm a topic in data visualization?
You're going to be a chapter in a book one day.
How not to do it.
Well, Duncan's doing a lot of cool stuff right now, like spinning up a data sonification studio, and he even arranged his schedule, his freelance schedule, to take an entire month off in the summer. So we are all dying to know how he did that, so we can replicate it. And we're going to talk a lot more about the things Duncan's doing. First of all, I'm Ali Torben. We also, of course, have Duncan Geere and Gabriel Morit. And before we jump in, this show is supported by the members of the Elevate Database Learning community, who get the opportunity to watch and ask questions live. So if you'd like to do that and you want to level up your database skills in a very supportive community, check out elevatedatabase.com. Okay, so on to our Duncan discussion, our DD. Duncan, what have you been up to over, I guess, the past, maybe you want to do 2024, like how your Q1, Q2 have been going, and what have you been doing new?
Yeah, I mean, okay. So for people who don't know me very well, I should probably introduce myself very briefly. So I call myself an information designer. We have a whole video on job titles, but that is mine. And most people don't know what that is. So then I say something like, I help nonprofits tell data stories. They might have a big data set that maybe they've got from some scientists that work for them or from someone else, and they have an audience and they want to communicate things to that audience, and I help them do that with charts and maps and with text and with all kinds of stuff. So I sort of have a background as a journalist, and I bring a lot of that knowledge and experience into the work that I do. I would say of the core data visualization skill set, my strongest area is definitely the storytelling side of things, and like figuring out what to say rather than how to say it. But yeah, I kind of have learnt my design skills over the last, I guess, like 6 or 7 years, and statistical stuff as well. And so I can do most things that most clients ask me to do. I don't tend to sell code. I tend to partner with other people if clients want something code oriented. But most of the time, it's more around taking a message that they want to get out and finding data stories that will support that. And I help them do that kind of work. And this year, I've been doing that for a few organizations. I did a big project in the first half of the year with Louders, which is a big climate funder. And that was kind of like helping them do some internal analysis on their grant giving work. And I did that in partnership with, or alongside, Miriam Quick, whose name I'm probably going to mention quite a few times in this in the session today, because we work together a lot. Miriam is an amazing data researcher, and she also has a journalism background. So we kind of come at things from a similar perspective, and we tend to do quite a bit of work as a partnership. Yes, that's Miriam's website.
Yep, and
she's done some really great stuff.
Yeah, she's co-authored a book with Stephanie Posavec, the I Am a Book.
Yeah, I was trying to see if it was behind me there, but I don't think it is right now. I think it's over on my bookshelf over there. I won't get it. So yeah, I did that. But then I also have a collection of like ongoing clients. I work 2 days a week for a climate charity in the UK called Possible, and I am their data lead. And so I do data visualization work for them and mapping. I do some like web interactive stuff for them sometimes when it's relatively straightforward. And I also do kind of like broader graphic design tasks for them.
And that's a salaried part-time job, right?
Yes, except that like it would be if I lived in the UK. I don't. I live in Sweden. And so as a result, it is a freelance relationship and I'm a supplier to them, but it is an we have a open-ended contract that is basically, I guess it's like a retainer.
Yeah, like a recurring contract, that long-term
a recurring contract. Yeah, each quarter they figure out how many days do they want from me that quarter, and yeah, I just get paid a day rate from them for the days that I work.
Has it been pretty consistent, or it's like sometimes it's like, oh, we want 1 day, or sometimes we want 5 days, but has it been pretty consistent?
Fairly consistent, yeah. I tend to do 2 days a week. In the contract, it can go as low as 1 and as high as 3. But yeah, most of the time we just do 2 days, and that it kind of works out well like that. That's a good level of involvement for me in terms of what I can, like the amount of work they can provide me, but also the amount of work, time that I can provide them in a week.
And you have specific days that you work for them, right? Like Monday and Tuesday are like my days.
It's Wednesday and Thursday, yeah. So I was working for them today, and I'll be working for them tomorrow, depending on when you are watching this. But if you're watching,
so they know
live,
those are the days you'll be working.
And those are the days I'll be around, and yeah, they have the briefs and the data and stuff like that ready for me in advance.
Yeah, it's a unique situation. I know some people feel like, should I only freelance or only salaried? And I feel like that's a really interesting middle ground that people might not realize that is available.
Yeah, these long-term retainers, especially once you build up a kind of level of trust with an organization, it can be really, really great, both for them that they can have I give them a substantially discounted rate on my standard rate because they are buying lots of time at once. And
it's consistent, and you work well with them, right? Like you wouldn't do that with someone
we have
who's
a
like
really
a
good relationship. I can work with anyone in the organization because I know almost everyone in the organization.
Yeah.
And from my end as well, it's great because I have a team that I can, feel like I'm a part of, and we can do better things together than I could do on my own, and like bigger projects, and I can access funding that I wouldn't be able to access on my own. So yeah, I think it's a really positive relationship for both sides.
A lot of your work that you've done with them has been picked up by news outlets too, which is really great.
Yeah. I mean, that's really nice as well. They have a proper communications team. They have a social media officer. They have a press officer.
Reaching out.
Exactly. That have relationships with journalists already. And so they're really good at doing impactful work and then getting that covered, which is, it's a real treat when you are often, or like other projects that I tend to be more around, I do a piece of work and then I never hear about it again. How well it does.
Like, I hope they
whether it gets covered or anything. Yeah.
Can you?
So that's my work with Possible. Oh, sorry, Gabby. Yeah, you were going to ask a question.
Well, first, I wanted to highlight the fact that it might seem like not a lot to do 2 days, but your work at Possible has been really impactful. Like you've been featured in. Is that the work being featured in The Guardian like several times now? This different studies you help design,
over several years, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, and one thing that we try and do as well, for those who aren't aware, The Guardian is quite a left-leaning news outlet in the UK, but we also get coverage quite a lot from right-leaning publications, and that to me is even more impactful because when we can, like the work that I do for them is very climate-oriented, and when we can get our messages into more like right-leaning publications, that to me says that we're doing something really right, something that's speaking to a much wider audience than just the environmental bubble. And so
not an echo chamber.
Exactly. And so then, I get even more proud when I'm in the Daily Mail than I'm in the Guardian, for those of you who are familiar with those publications.
Can you, sorry, I'm digging it. Tell me if I'm sidetracking too much, but I think it's not that common for people working in our field to see our work featured in different places. And it's not just related to our work, but the entire organization, how it works. And could you explain a little more about like, how does Possible work and why do they end up in all those places? And why is their work featured so much around? Is it just the quality of the work? Is it how they approach the media? Like, how does that work?
I think that it's a combination of things. I think first, the work has to be good. Like if the work wasn't good, we wouldn't get coverage. And, that's the kind of ground level. But even if you are doing good work, and there's tons of people who are doing great work who aren't getting coverage, I think it's really, really important to have an established relationship with news media. And that is something that is it's not data visualization work at all. It is communications work, and it's something that you build up over years, and you do that as much by sending press releases and being in touch with journalists as you do by doing things like offering exclusives to particular outlets, or to, you get a call and they say, my deadline's in 30 minutes. Can you tell me about this news story? Like, what do you think about that? And being able to like wrangle the right members of staff to be available for those kinds of things can be quite challenging, especially in smaller organizations where everybody's wearing a lot of hats. So making sure people feel confident and like media trained and able to speak to the press about the kinds of things that they are working on, because not everybody feels comfortable with that necessarily. I think that's really, really important as well. So there's a kind of preparedness for when the news cycle turns to something that you are working on, and then being able to have a relationship with the kinds of journalists who are writing about it so that they call you, and then having something good to talk about when they call you. Like it's those sort of like three things really. But I'm super impressed constantly by Possible's comms team, and I'm only a very, very small part of it. I just make charts.
Well,
I love that.
When there's a nice chart associated with like really great expertise and someone's like reaching out, it's like the trifecta, right? Like,
and I think a really key thing, I think there are two key things that Possible does that a lot of other like maybe campaigning organizations don't tend to do. One of which is a lot of Possible stuff is constructive. Like we tend to campaign for things rather than against them. So we don't campaign against like aviation. We campaign for a frequent flyer levy so that people who fly more often pay more tax. Or we campaign for higher taxes on private jets, or things like that. And it's all done with a very, very equality oriented lens in mind, where we are very aware that there are a lot of people in the UK right now and around the world who are struggling to get by, and that if we are pushing for policies that will make those people poorer, that's not gonna work. It's not going to be effective. And so instead, what we do is we apply a very strong anti-oppression lens on the kind of work that we do, and we apply a very strong kind of like inequality lens. And I think that's really important. But then for people who are watching this who are more interested in data, I think the other really, really great thing that we do is we tell data stories and we tell human stories at the same time. And that's super, super effective, because if you just tell a data story, it doesn't necessarily connect on a human emotional level with people. Whereas if you just tell a human story, it's easy to be like, oh, that's just one person's experience. That doesn't actually work out as the, average or whatever. And so what we try and do is tell both at the same time. We say, here are the statistics, and here are the voices of the people who are experiencing this situation. And that's really effective, I think.
Yeah, because data is about people, and we're trying to use data to make better decisions and affect other fellow humans around us. So having both sides of that story, it's like two sides of a coin, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Did you go through all the things that you're doing? I don't think you've gotten to numbers yet.
I'm doing far too many things. Another thing I do, it's not really data viz. I write a column each week for the official Minecraft website. That's like a really bizarre thing.
So
I think
random.
not a lot of people know that I do it. I've been doing it since like 2017 or something, for a very, very long time. And it's super fun though. I'm a big fan of Minecraft. I think it's a wonderful game. I've literally got Minecraft blocks like behind me. But yeah,
these articles aren't like data viz related. It's more of
not at all. It is so what it is it's a kind of, I think it's probably the only real hangover from my previous career as a science and technology journalist, where what I do is I pick a block or an item in, featured in Minecraft each week, or a monster or some structure or whatever, and I write about what it does in the game, and I write about whatever the closest thing in the real world is. And so it turns into kind of like pop science, pop history for kids, and it's super fun. Like I
Oh.
wrote an article about rabbits the other day, and now I know so much more about rabbits than I used to. So it's really great. I really enjoy writing those every Friday morning.
Well, the funny thing is that someone in the Elevate community was talking about how they wanted to shift their niche a little bit. And they were like, well, am I going to have wasted all the years that I spent developing this one skill that I have if I'm going to pivot a little bit? And I think this shows if you do pivot, that doesn't mean you have to give up everything you did previously.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Just keep the good clients for as long as you
the
can.
fun projects.
Yeah, and the fun projects, the things you enjoy doing, like keep doing them.
Yeah. There's no reason to stop.
I'm very lucky that I'm able to still do that after so long.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like it speaks to a certain mindset? Because you've obviously been very successful as an information designer, despite several careers to careers, and even we'll talk about also where you're currently today in, I guess, information design, not just data visualization.
Yeah.
But do you feel like it speaks to the benefits of having curiosity in a career that's so new? Because it's still very new, data viz. Like, what's the benefits of you changing so much and learning so much? Like, do you see like a thread of like, well, it allows me to adapt more? I don't know. Or is it just you and you're just special and you just love all those weird things?
I mean, I do kind of like collect hobbies, like far too many of them. But I don't know. I think that the biggest benefit from my perspective is that I get to do what I'm enjoying. Like, I kind of shifted away from journalism because I was having less and less fun writing. And like having writing as being like the main thing that I do. I do enjoy writing from time to time still, but I kind of got a bit burnt out on it. And so part of the transition was because I was excited about something new, in that case, data visualization and mapping and things. And I wanted to do more of that. So I started doing more of that, initially as personal projects and like trying to find a way to do that kind of work as much as I could within the framework of the work that I was doing at the time. But then, yeah, increasingly I was able to, use my network, I guess, to, sell my data visualization skills. And I've been lucky that I've been able to be successful in the process of doing that, I guess. But yeah, I was going to say, just to kind of like directly address the skills thing, I think that, like in my case, the skill that I had from journalism was knowing how to communicate information succinctly to a specific audience, right? And that is exactly what data visualization is about as well. So, just all that's happened really is that I've shifted my primary medium in which I was doing that from text to shapes, really, and it's the same set of skills that I'm using. It's not like I've gone and become a carpenter or something. But even if I had gone and become a carpenter, maybe I'd have ended up like, I don't know, writing about carpentry or something. And like there's ways to use your skills in any kind of job and make that job a job that you enjoy doing.
Yeah, and it seems like you're kind of playing on hard mode if you are trying to do different things that you like, but not use any of your overlapping skills.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like,
Definitely.
well, I'm already good at this. Let me kind of apply the thing I'm good at and kind of like to this new thing that I want to explore. And you can kind of keep doing the overlap of different Venn diagrams and it kind of just builds.
And it's really rare that a client will want somebody to only do data visualization, if that makes sense. They might think that, but really what they want is somebody who can do data visualization, who knows something about the areas that they work in. And so for me that tends to be environmental nonprofits. And I have an academic background in like meteorology and climatology and environmental science, and so even though I'm not working in those fields directly, I bring that knowledge to the data visualization work that I do, and it's so much quicker for me to get up to speed in understanding what a particular client is working on and all of that, compared to somebody who didn't have that experience. So
you have an
shouldn't be like
understanding
shy
of what's
to
important.
to like bring out your other Venn diagram circles and surface them to a client if it's relevant. If it's not relevant, then obviously don't. But yeah, where it is, I think that can put you in front of other people. And I've definitely got jobs because I've been able to do that in the past.
It does seem relevant, not just for client, but for our audience here, like database information designer, people who wants to get into that field. Of most of us have a career beforehand. It's really rare that people come straight out of school being like, I want to do this really specific thing called data visualization. And so the fact that it's not wasted our previous education, whether it's in business, climate, biology, data analytics,
health,
there's always
whatever,
a way to use it. Yeah, wherever. I think that's super relevant that you mainly only work for climate clients, not just, but a lot. And I think it makes sense because that's you utilize what the best you've done.
And also it kind of happens naturally because that's where my network is as well, you know.
That's a great point. Is that how you started? Can you talk about how like that transition happened when you went from like climate journalism to database?
Yeah, so that transition happened. Previously, I was working for an organization called How We Get to Next, a publication, called How We Get to Next, which was run by a fantastic company called Story Things out of Brighton. Shout out to Story Things. They are amazing. They're really, really good at doing interesting audience-related work. And it was a really, really lovely place to work. And they were, as I was kind of like developing this interest in like, working with data essentially and showing data, they were extremely supportive in giving me the time to learn the skills that I needed and to use those skills in the work that I was doing. So I would start making charts that would go into my articles. And if you crawl through the archive, you can see it on screen there. You'll find some not actually that great charts, but they were good enough and they did what they needed to do.
Gotta start somewhere.
Yeah, and where I started was what's it called? Nathan Yao and his flowing data membership,
Yeah.
And I just went in there and I followed a bunch of his like R tutorials for generating charts and then styling them up and put them in my articles. And that was great.
Yep.
And then from there, I got a job with Information is Beautiful on their Beautiful News project. And they hired me as an editor, someone who was primarily responsible for writing copy around their data visualization work. And while I was there, I was able to contribute like sketches and things like not necessarily final graphics, but to kind of think about the ways in which we were communicating the data. And then it would be passed on to their designer, the amazing Fabio, to turn into like really nice, good looking charts and things. And then from there, I went freelance and began to start working with like full-time freelance. I was working for these other organizations freelance as well, because I think both of them are based in the UK, same as we were talking about with Possible earlier. And so it's easier to employ me on a freelance basis. But I was working more or less full-time with them and just doing like a couple of freelancey bits and bobs around the sides, like writing for the Minecraft website and things like that. And and then from that point, I went full-time freelance. I secured a couple of jobs through contacts that I'd had previous to working at Information is Beautiful, like people who I had worked with on other kind of like Story Things projects where I was doing some editorial work with them. And, I would be like, I'll be the editor on your report. And it looks like you need some data visualization in this report. So let's do some data visualization and I can help you with that and blah, blah, blah. So that kind of helped me build up a bit of a portfolio of commercial clients. And then, I was able to keep going from there, really. I think one thing that has been very helpful for me, especially when freelance stuff has been quieter, is spending the time on doing side projects and like, marketing myself, essentially doing R&D. Like that's what I think of personal projects as. But also just like, and I've talked a lot about this in the Elevate community before, but just like having relatively low fixed costs in my life. Like I've, made life choices so that my daily life isn't that expensive. And as a result, it's easier for me to operate when there's less work around. But for a few years now, that hasn't really been too much of a problem for me. I've been able to maintain a, relatively consistent pipeline.
Mhm.
And there's a certain amount of privilege in that. Not everybody can do that, and I want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, for sure. But it does take time to like get that wheel turning. We were talking about that in the Elevate community recently too. How when you are kind of transitioning to freelance, it does take a good amount of time to get those connections and branch out in terms of who you work with and how many projects you do with that person. Whether you can like do the editing job plus data viz, because they've learned that you are really good at your job and you have that skill. So it does take time. But once you get the wheel turning, it's a little bit easier to keep things going, even when like the economy is going down or those jobs are tough to find in general.
Yeah. And you just kind of have to go through a phase where you just say yes to absolutely every project. And that can sort of feel awful at times because you end up working with terrible clients on terrible projects sometimes.
Yeah.
Of course, none of my past clients are terrible projects or terrible clients. Of course they're not.
Liar.
But but it's like going through some of those projects is an incredibly educating experience, and making the best of them will make you so much better at your job in the following years. Like there's so much I've learned from those kinds of projects.
Yeah, you will get more skills, and also you kind of just hone your intuition. Like this doesn't seem to be going in a good direction, or there are some red flags.
Exactly. Yeah.
Isn't that also, I want to say, because we talk about terrible client, but I feel like sometimes it's not that terrible client as much as a terrible fit. Like just some clients are just not a good fit for the specific
they want something that you can't deliver, be that rate, be that experience, be that knowledge of a certain specific area. It's not always a good fit. And you're absolutely right to call me out low key on calling them terrible clients, because it's not. It is a terrible fit.
I'm not calling out. I just want to.
Some people are terrible.
I like to precise, because I feel like there's a trend in the world of design of talking pretty bad mouthing the clients, but I actually think that most clients are great. First, most of us have great experiences, and most of the time it's a fit issue. It's not really either the client or the project or the designer. It's just that all of those things together just don't work. No one is terrible really per se, like individually.
Totally, completely agree. Yeah.
Having that attitude also, I feel like sometimes gets clients to get on board with what you can do. Because if you're like, it doesn't seem like we're a good fit. This is what I do. This is what you want. And they're like, oh, but the fact that you said that kind of makes me trust you a little more. So can you tell me what you can do so we can still work together?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I got a message the other day from a client who wanted me to do some brand design work and then design a slide deck and then do some data visualization in it. And I was kind of like, I can definitely do the data visualization. I could probably do your slide deck, but I'm not a brand designer. You're going to need to, we are, I use the word we here. We're going to need to find someone to help us with that stuff.
Yeah.
And I said, I can go out and do that for you and subcontract somebody, or if you prefer, you can, find somebody and I'll happily work with them. And so I think having this collaborative approach to working with your clients, and they've got a problem that they just want to be solved. So if you can be the one who helps solve that problem, no matter what your skill set is, I think that can be really, really helpful.
Agree. All right. We're not through the list of things you're doing yet.
Yeah, and you only asked me about the first half of the year. The second half of the year is incredibly busy. So it's the constant truth of my life is I'm spinning far too many plates all the time. And I've got systems that let me keep those plates going. But it can be a little bit stressful at times. Maybe we should talk about taking July off before while we're on that topic.
I was gonna say that. I was gonna ask, because we should disclaimer around the people at this table. Duncan's probably the best at boundary between work-life and work-life balance.
This is the time I have. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah, and maybe that's a European thing, but I would love if you can talk a bit about how you do balance, because you still do a lot of things. It's not like you say no to everything, but I'd be curious to see what are the rules in your life that helps you make those decisions and choose when to take things on or not, and what do you do also for your own balance, I guess.
Yeah, and allowed you to take a month off over the summer.
I mean, like the simple answer is I just didn't book any work that I would need to do in July. Like it's like it is as simple as that, really.
So in practice, like Possible says, we need work
I
done,
said
and
to
you're like,
Possible
July
months
is
in
off.
advance. I said to Possible months in advance, I'm not going to be working in July.
Yeah. And then an inquiry comes in and like they're like, oh, we need a report next month. And you're like, I'm not working in July. I can
what's
do
your
it in August.
timeline?
Yeah.
And they say, oh, we'd like to get it out in the middle of August. And I'd say, well, I'm not going to be working in July. So, I could do some stuff in June, but otherwise, I'd be happy to introduce you to somebody else.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of finances, like you said, you have your fixed costs and you know how much you need to make in a year in order to cover the fixed costs plus more. And you were looking, how far in advance were you looking to be like, okay, July is okay for me to take off? Like, can you talk about the timeline and when you made the decision and like, what were you thinking through?
Yeah. So I think okay, so for people who don't freelance, it's important to know that the whole thing is a roller coaster. There are two modes of freelance. One mode is, oh my God, I am so busy. How the hell am I going to get all of this stuff done? The second mode is, oh my God, like I've got no work. Nobody's going to hire me ever again.
I'm never working again. Yeah.
Those are the only two modes.
I love that.
Freelance. And the way that I cope with that, it's not even a roller coaster. It's more like Tetris. It's just like straight up and straight down. The way that I cope with that is I have built up, like I've taken on enough work in the past that I've built up a buffer in my company's account, and I pay myself a flat rate every month out of that buffer. And so I've got about 6 months worth of salary essentially in my company account. And so if I need to take time off, it's fine because I can just eat down that buffer slightly and then take on slightly more work, later on, essentially, or charge more for the same amount of work.
Yeah, figure out how to get it back up later.
Exactly.
In business terms, this is called cash flow. It means that you have cash flow aside for 6 months.
Yeah, exactly. So again, I didn't really actively think I need to make this amount in this month to be able to take this month off. I was just like, oh, this is buffer. Buffer is going to take care of this, and I have trust in future Duncan that this isn't going to be a problem. And if it does become a problem in the future, then I deal with that problem when I come to it. But right now, it's not a problem. So
were you thinking back in January, like, okay, I'm taking July off, like we're planning a trip, we're doing X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even plan a trip. I stayed at home as much as I possibly could. This has been my year where I've been trying to travel as little as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And yeah, I took one trip down to Luxembourg by train, but that was all paid for by an organization. I went and I spoke at Asteroid Day in Luxembourg about data sonification, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. And yeah, that's the only trip I've taken this year. So no, I stayed home. I just chilled out. I, did a little bit of unpaid stuff on R&D projects, like personal stuff, but not any paid work.
Anything where your curiosities took you. It wasn't like,
yeah, exactly. I was kind of following my, what I wanted to do day to day, which is a dream. I almost never get the chance to do that, and so just kind of giving myself a month to do that felt really good.
Did it change your perspective at all when you came back to work on what you would changing your day, how you laid out your day, or maybe what you wanted to do going forward?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I didn't sort of necessarily use it as a time to kind of step back and do big picture thinking or anything. I have a sort of system for that anyway, that happens every 100 days or so. And again, I think I've talked about that before on the show. No, I don't think so. I think, I came back and I knew that there was going to be a big project that I would jump straight into. And so I jumped straight into it. And now I've had, yeah, 2 months or a month and a half of incredibly busy times. And my holiday feels very, very far away.
It's trying to remember.
It's interesting though that you separated. You have reviews, so just for those who haven't listened to other episodes, go back in time. But he does quarterly reviews about what he wants, right? Correct. Every 100 days you do some reviews and more.
Yeah,
and every month.
triannual. It's like 3 times a year. I just like round numbers, so it's every 100 days. Yeah.
Yeah. I just feel like it's important. So because you have that, you haven't merged that vacation time off with business, which I think is kind of important to highlight, because we tend to do that, being like, I'm gonna take 2 weeks. And those 2 weeks are going to be filled with me updating my website, contacting people on LinkedIn, or revisiting my business.
And all of that stuff is work.
And all that stuff is actually work. It's not time off. So you actually put that month off and you did nothing related to work. I mean, R&D is R&D, but it's not, it might end up in business, I assume, but it's not the
like
goal.
Admin,
correct?
kind of.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. Yeah, and it was good. And I'm going to try and do the same thing next year, because I think it was a success and I really enjoyed it. And yeah, you just need to kind of like make sure your rates are set at a level that bakes in some holiday time. Because if you're not, then of course you're going to be working the whole year.
Yeah, because that means you're going to charge enough. Like you have your fixed amount that you need to have per year, not just your fixed cost, but also like any spending that you need to do for fun. You know how much you need to hit that number, and you distribute that by 11 months, not 12, so that you can make that amount and have a month off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's,
it is.
That's how you set your financial targets for the year. Exactly.
Yeah, and it does feel like a mystery to be like, how'd you take a month off? But if you think about it, just like think about the math, and if you plan ahead, then it seems so doable. And I think just seeing that someone else did it and seeing how they did it, it's just like, oh, what would that look like if I took a month off? Like, what would I need to do to be ready by next July to do something like that? And maybe it's not an entire month. Maybe it's just like 3 weeks or 2 weeks. Because I mean, I don't know if I've ever taken 2 full weeks off at a time. I think I've only done a week. So maybe
how American of you.
I know. So like,
I think it's also an American issue. They're like, a month of vacation.
I know.
And my French mind is like, that's not even like the 6 weeks that you get in France if you're like employed.
Yeah, I know. So just thinking about taking the whole month off just is kind of mind blowing to me. But I love thinking about what that would look like, and that it seems like very doable. And when you left, you already had that August project set up, right? You knew you were coming back to work.
Yeah.
Because I feel like some people might be thinking, well, like, I know I have maybe I did set up a buffer, but then you're coming back cold. You might be coming back cold in August and being like, ooh, now I got to get the wheels turning. And like, it might actually be like another month before I see another invoice, Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what the buffer helps with. Again, like so many problems around freelancing are solved by having that buffer. It's really, game changing in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And
it's also,
again, I want to kind of like acknowledge the privilege that allows me to do that, and not everybody can.
Yeah.
But it's so powerful if you are able to do that.
I think it's important to highlight, though, as you say, it's not just for vacation. It's also riding those waves of, as you said, like it goes really busy and you potentially make a ton of money, and then it goes away for a while, or you don't get paid for months. Sometimes if you have really big project, the income, know it's coming, but in 4 months, and you have to write your rent.
Or there's delays in the invoice processing inevitably.
Yeah. So I feel like it's just important to highlight that.
Quite honestly,
in general.
like the big game changer for making my business so much more, I don't want to use the word successful, but like enjoyable, maybe is like the better way to put it, was raising my rates to a level where I could build up that buffer and be comfortable with the highs and the lows, and kind of like taking each day as it comes. So I mean, like, it is the most basic business advice like you can possibly give, but raise your rates. Like if people are consistently saying no, you're too expensive, that's about the point where you should stop raising them. But like everybody says all the time, if nobody is telling you you're too expensive, then you're not expensive enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that's absolutely true. Sometimes clients can't afford to pay the rates that I charge. And we've talked about kind of like pricing in the past. Again, you can go back in the archive and look at that. But really, seriously, people, raise your rates. It's like life-changing.
Think about taking the month of July. You're just raising your rates to build that buffer so you can take a month off. Thinking of like a deposit in for future you. It's not like you're being greedy. You're like planning for your future.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to do what you're doing in the long term, you need to take time off as part of that.
Yeah, it's so important.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Do you think that's good on the July vacation? I think that it's...
I think so. So let me tell you about the other thing that I'm doing at the moment that I'm kind of excited by and is a bit of a change from what I've been doing previously. Maybe we should talk about loud numbers first.
Yes. Yeah.
I was going to ask, what's the next transition from Duncan?
Yeah. So let's talk about loud numbers first. Loud numbers, I mentioned Miriam Quick earlier. I met her at a conference in 2019 and we chatted a little bit. And then I saw her at an awards show a couple of months later. And I just kind of like was chatting about how, wouldn't it be cool if there was a data sonification podcast? And she was like, oh yeah, that would be cool, in a kind of totally non-committed way. And I was like, hey, you have a music background, right? Maybe we should do it together. And she was like, oh yeah, but I'll think about it. And I was not expecting to hear anything back after that. But then a few days later, she sent me an email and she was like, yeah, I think that would be fun. Let's do it. And so we started this project, which was a podcast, and it's data sonification, which, for those of you who aren't aware, is the process of turning data instead of into visuals, but into sound and music instead. And yeah, we did 5 episodes of a podcast that we released in the middle of 2021 or so. And in the process, we documented our learnings. We were sending a weekly newsletter, basically like, here's what we did on this project this week. And doing that kind of like working in public was incredibly valuable. Like sometimes it was just a paragraph or something. It was really short. Sometimes it was longer. But doing that working in public really like helped us build an audience and get people's like opinions and thoughts and knowledge and expertise on the things that we were doing. And that was really, really effective in developing what the whole loud numbers thing has turned into, which is essentially a commercial studio for doing projects with data and sound. So now we've taken on a bunch of commercial clients from like big events agencies. We worked with Walmart at one point through an agency, and then, but all the way down to artists who've just got a grant to do some kind of like sonification work, and they just want a little bit of like mentorship, hand-holding in the process of doing that. And earlier this year, we applied for a grant from the region that I live in Sweden, an arts grant. It was called CCI for Change, Cultural and Creative Industries for Change. And they wanted to do a project around energy use. And we pitched this idea that was basically an 8-hour-long sonification that plays out in real time overnight and sonifies the energy use of different devices that are used by a collection of volunteers that we gave smart plugs to.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, so we equipped them with plugs. We got them to collect like a week's worth of data on different appliances in their homes, like a water boiler, a fridge, mobile phone charger, router, all kinds of stuff. And now we're in the process of turning that into it has ballooned to a 10-hour and 40-minute piece of music that is designed to be listened to while people are sleeping. And we're going to be broadcasting it in a series of like slumber parties later this year.
Oh my gosh, that's so fun.
It's super cool. And yeah, and the funder really liked it because it was, it's about like it taps into a bunch of different things around, I guess, like these concepts of recharging. Like we sleep to recharge, but all our devices are still using energy during that time. And so it kind of gets people to think about energy use, not in a, you need to use that energy kind of way, but in a, well, I'm sleeping, maybe my stuff should be sleeping too kind of way.
Yeah, the
Like,
invisible things you don't think about.
exactly. Yeah,
Huh.
these kind of like invisible little energy vampires that are in your home. And so, yeah, just kind of like making that more visible. And we're like right in the middle of this whole process right now. Miriam sent me the first draft of the music the other day, and it sounds amazing. We've got like, people might be familiar with like Nessun Dorma, the song. It's like one of Pavarotti's classics. Yeah, you will probably recognize it if you heard it. It's a very famous piece of classical music, but we've like stretched it out, this like 3.5-minute recording, to 10 hours and 40 minutes. And all the stuff in the track happens on top. And the way it works is each device is attached to a specific sound. And every time that device uses a certain amount of energy, you hear that sound. And so if something is using a lot of energy at a certain time of night, you will hear that sound more often. And if it's using hardly any energy, you will hear it much less often. That's how it works.
Did you say, did you say it was using Nessun Dorma? Like, what? I'm really excited about this because I love this song. So I'm really excited. Can you,
yeah.
well, I mean, I was just thinking about the beginning, if you don't mind backtracking a bit, but you said you had to get fund through an art, through like an art scholarship. How different is that process from getting a client?
Hugely. Yeah, hugely. I mean, there's no, you hardly talk to a person at all. It's like there is a sheet, and you fill out the sheet and you give good answers and you write down your budget and you know, break it down, and the budget has to look reasonable, and you need to very carefully, I think probably people who've got experience like writing bids for like work projects might have a bit more similarity with this kind of thing. But like the way I tend to start with a freelance client is they send me an email, I reply to the email, we set up a call, we chat, we see if it sounds reasonable. I follow up with my rates, you know, and then we work from there on a thing. It's a very like person to person kind of, you know, you get a feel for each other, see what it's, you know, whether you're going to be good to work with and everything. With this, you don't speak to a person at all. You fill out an application form, and then a month, 2 months, sometimes 3 months later, you get an email saying, yes, you got the money, or no, you didn't get the money. That's how it
this was a call. This was a call for proposals, right?
This was a call for proposals.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't like you pitched the idea out of nowhere.
No,
it's
no.
They called for it.
Was it for data sonification specifically, or just art pieces?
Creative industries. So incredibly broad. And the other grantee, there were 2 grantees in this round. The other one is an art gallery that wants to improve the energy efficiency of their building. So it's like a completely different project, very, very different. And so, yeah, it's really interesting being in this world. I have not done a lot of like grant applications before. I'm sure that there's probably people watching this who have and have found it a nightmare. So far, I'm like,
how did you hear about it?
1 of 1.
How did I
hear about it? Yeah, so this is a useful thing to talk about as well, actually.
Yeah.
I moved to a new city in November last year. I live now in Malmö in the south of Sweden, which is just over the bridge from Copenhagen in Denmark. And when I moved here, I applied to a kind of small like cultural business incubator called Stapeln. They have this program called Stapeln Lab where you're kind of like resident there for a year. And there's a lot of workshops that help you run your business. You know, how do you do marketing? How do you do pricing? Like a lot of the same stuff that we talk about in the Elevate community, but kind of physical and in person. And there's a building, and you're part of a group of other people. But this has been fantastic for building up my network in and around Malmö. I've had so many opportunities to do cool stuff, and particularly more like artsy stuff that I have always wanted to do, but have never really been able to do before. Like beforehand, the way I've done the kind of artsier end of like the work that I do is it's the R&D that I was talking about earlier. I will charge clients, you know, maybe a bit more, and then use the extra money that I have to fund myself for spending time on doing these projects that I think are important and useful, but that don't bring in any money, like the Loud Numbers podcast, for example. And what I have found hugely interesting is that the vast majority of other artists don't work that way at all. Like, they don't have successful businesses that they're running on the side and they fund their art that way. They are applying for funds constantly, and it's much, much harder.
Yeah.
And so I'm in quite a lucky position that I have, quite a lot of freedom to do that kind of work, but it is like self-funded. And so I don't want to, I realize that art grants are a limited pool, and that pool is shrinking in most countries right now, certainly in the Western world. And I don't want to take away too much of the funds that could be used by other people to do cool stuff. But in this case, I had an idea that I thought I really believed in, and I thought was like a really, really strong idea, and that felt compelling to me. And yeah, the funder agreed. And so we put the application in and we got the money.
So how did you hear about it though? It was through that group? Someone told you, hey,
through that group.
this
Yes,
thing?
sorry. Yeah. So it was set up through that group. We circulate funding opportunities between ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and again, we do that in Elevate too. We have an opportunities channel where we post things that we see that you can apply to. Sometimes it's jobs, sometimes it's funding calls and other stuff.
Yeah, but there's some sort of like central database where it has at least a lot of artist calls, right?
Yeah, there's a few of these things for different parts of the world. It is a really competitive place to kind of like inhabit. And you do need to go into it with some, third-party credibility, I guess. And so being able to show, I've done this thing,
I can do it,
for many years. Yeah, exactly. Like, the funder needs to know that this is something that you are going to be able to execute well on, and you'll be able to get it done. And like putting together the application well, like reading what it is that they actually want to fund, and making sure your application addresses that, doing your budget, just like meeting all their requirements is really, really important to be able to get those opportunities.
It does seem like you need to have an idea, and so that means you need to know like the budget, what you would actually execute. It can't be like, I'm going to use this money to explore what I would do. Because I always kind of thought that's what it was. But for a lot of these, they want to know what you're going to do.
They want a shovel-ready project, basically.
Yeah, which can be tough. Yeah,
it can. Yeah, and what you have to do is you have to use your R&D time to figure out what some of those projects might be. Like, have a little library of things that you would love to do if you had the space and the time and the money to do them, and have like little things written up so that when a funding call comes by, you can immediately just like fill it out very quickly and get it off, and do as many of those as you can, because some of them you'll get, but most of them you probably won't.
Yeah, it's interesting. That means you have to like do work on your own first, like kind of unpaid work, so that you have all the information and data about how the work even happened and what you can do and what ideas you have.
Yeah, and Miriam and I have set some time aside in advance in December, where we are going to just like take some of the, because ideas come flying around all the time. We just kind of like log them. And December, we're going to try and spend some time to actually firm some of those up into actual things that could be funded, like figure out what it would cost to do a good job on that and everything. So that next time funding calls come out, we can quickly submit things.
Yeah.
It happens all the time that like we find something and there's 3 days before the deadline and we're like, oh my God, like, are we gonna be able to do this? Probably not. We're far too busy working on this other thing that we've committed to. So we miss it. And so it would be good to have some stuff in the bank.
Yeah. There's this one I do know of, the Library of Congress Innovator in Residence. I always see that one come up. And
that's a fantastic program.
Yeah, it looks so cool. And because you can like basically do anything you want, and they have so much data. So it is very much up our alley. But I remember looking at it once being like, oh, maybe I'll apply. But it's like, you need to have an idea already. And like really crystal clear expectations on budget and like what you're going to need. And like all down to lists of like things you want to buy. So it can be,
you got to know your stuff.
You have to know. And the only way for you to know what you might do is like, maybe you will stumble on an idea, or if you're doing personal projects, if you're doing personal R&D, then you will have figured out something that you can do and make it really easy for you to determine what you would need and what the scope would be. So you can actually fill out these applications.
Yeah. And also like know what your local funding landscape is like. I know that it's quite different between Europe and the US, for example. A lot of our funding is governmental, whereas a lot of yours is more foundation oriented. You know, I'm sure that in other parts of the world it's different again. And so just kind of like having a sense of what it is like, and that has been what Starpalm, the creative hub that I'm part of, has been incredibly helpful for me to understand, because, you know, I'm not from Sweden, I'm from the UK, and the UK has a weird mix of some foundations and some local government stuff. So it's, yeah, but I never applied for any arts funding or really engaged very much in that world when I was in the UK. So yeah, you, like anything, you have to do your research and know how things work before you will have much success in a field.
Yeah, and don't expect to just jump in and like, you know, get it all. Just kind of have an understanding of the landscape, like you said, and see what other people are creating, and it might jog some ideas for you. And like, oh, maybe next year I can do something similar, or just like this.
But looking forwards, you know, I love doing the sonification stuff, and I want to keep doing that. But I definitely don't want to drop data visualization at all. Gabby, you were sort of asking earlier, like, what am I jumping to next?
Yeah.
I think that like what is most important to me is working on climate and environmental change. That feels like the biggest problem the world is facing right now. And so that's the focus of my work. And I think that the most effective way I can do that is with my kind of like data viz and communication skills. So I'm going to keep working on that until it's not a problem anymore. Fingers crossed. And
you have a long career ahead of you.
well, hopefully not. Hopefully it's just a couple of years and then I can retire. But let's face it, that's probably not going to happen. But I also want to explore doing the sonification stuff, because as I've said in these shows before, sonification is really interesting because it's a completely different emotional landscape to visualization. You don't learn things, you experience them. And that is a totally new tool that I think not enough people know how to use effectively yet. So I'm really excited about continuing to explore that while still doing data viz work.
I think something also that we should probably point out is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like there are opportunities to do both together. So it's an extension of what you currently do, like an added skill.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like I said right at the start of this, I spin far too many plates, and some of those plates are sonification and some of them are data viz, and as I was saying earlier, one of them is still editorial. So I really like working on a diversity of things, and I think if there's anything that characterizes the work that I do, it is like diversity and having experiences in lots of different areas and then figuring out what I can draw together from those things. I think that's what I enjoy the most about the work that I do.
Yeah, diversity and curiosity, I feel like.
Yes. Yeah.
That sums it up well. Well, thank you, Duncan. Thanks for sharing all things Duncan today with us. We definitely learned a lot.
Thank you for being interested.
If you have any questions, any follow-up questions for Duncan or for any of us, definitely join our Elevate Data Viz learning community at elevatedataviz.com, and we will see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
folks.
you, everyone.
Bye-bye.